Knowing you, you must have saved up quite a bit, right? How much do you have now? These fawning words came from my husband, who I've been with for many years. I sighed at his words. I didn't feel like responding, but I knew my persistent husband would keep asking until I answered. I have about $400,000 in the bank account, but remember, that money isn't for us to use freely. I warned him as such. But advising my husband is synonymous with meaninglessness. He never listens. Oh, really? I see. Satisfied, my husband disappeared from our home the next day with the bank account details and our seal. Fed up with my foolish husband, I picked up the divorce papers he left behind. Where did he disappear to? No, that doesn't matter. Rather, if I'm going to disappear, now's my chance. With that thought, I quickly took action. And so, my husband began desperately searching for me, who had vanished. My name is Sydney Logan, and my husband Floyd and I are nearing our golden wedding anniversary. We were blessed with 2 children, our daughter Eileen and son Eddie. Both graduated from college, got jobs, married, and started their own families. To outsiders, we must look like a happy family. But there's something that's been troubling me for years. It's about my husband. It was an arranged marriage. He was the son of my father's mentor. Honestly, I didn't have a great first impression of him. He was 2 years younger than me. Maybe that's why, but he seemed incredibly naive. He also seemed somewhat sloppy at first glance. Plus, he never listened to me, always talking about himself. During an arranged marriage meeting, it's essential to talk to get to know the other person. But his stories weren't interesting at all. At work, I'm entrusted with a lot of responsibilities. Things often don't run smoothly without me. That's why I end up working late. I need someone who understands that. My husband blurted out right from the start. I managed a wry smile, but honestly, I wanted to tell him that I did not like what he had said very much. As I searched for words, he pressed on. Well, you'll be the older one in the relationship, so you'll understand, right? Was this man, who only talked about himself and never listened to me, really planning to marry me? Is he serious? Well, I don't know about that. In front of our parents and his, I had no choice but to respond that way. I thought they would understand my reluctance. Yet, somehow, I ended up being extremely favored by my husband and his parents. My parents were also pleased. I found myself unable to say no. Back then, it wasn't uncommon to marry someone chosen by your parents. Plus, everyone was so happy about it. I thought maybe living together would reveal his good sides. So, I reluctantly agreed to marry him. After getting married, it's not that I didn't see his good qualities. True to his boasting, he was diligent at work. He went to work earnestly every day. While he didn't advance exceptionally fast, his salary steadily increased. We lived with my in-laws, and they were kind to me. Still, that was the only good thing I saw in my husband. But we were fortunate enough to live peacefully. However, after he turned 40, our expenses began to increase gradually. When I asked why, he said it was company tradition for superiors to treat their subordinates. I understood that. But at the time, our daughter Eileen was in college and our son Eddie was in high school. The expenses were so high that I had to dip into my savings for their tuition and living expenses. No matter how many times I told my husband, he'd say, "Aren't you managing it? Just handle it." He was oblivious to my desperate pleas. Moreover, both in-laws fell ill at the same time, and the burden of caring for them fell all on me. My husband left it all to me. Even when I suggested, "At least let's hire a helper," he coldly dismissed it, saying, "What are you here for? If you need extra hands, get Eileen and Eddie to help. Don't waste money." "So, could you at least help a little? Maybe a little help with your father when he eats," I proposed. But his response was disappointing. "Caregiving isn't my job. If I don't work and bring in money, we'll all be doomed." He always made plausible excuses, never offering any solutions. Instead, his nights out and expenses only increased. I never intended to burden the children with caregiving, but they often helped with chores, seeing my condition. Eventually, after my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law followed soon after. Though sad, I couldn't deny feeling relieved to be free from caregiving. Years passed. Our children graduated, got jobs, and moved out. My husband Floyd and I were left alone in this house. He retired about 5 years ago, but still, he frequently goes out drinking, leaving the house empty. And his spending was as bad as ever. One day, fearing we'd run out of money if his wasteful spending continued, I spoke up. "Floyd, you need to stop spending so much. Do you really need to go out drinking so often now that you're retired? We have our own lives to live." To my words, he frowned in confusion. "Huh? I've worked hard all my life. I've got my retirement funds and pension. What's wrong with enjoying my freedom in my old age?" "I'm saying there's a limit. If we spend more than we have, we won't be able to survive. Let's worry about that when it happens." As usual, he never listens. I was utterly exasperated with him. A few days later, something happened. "What are you looking at?" My husband was staring at his mobile phone, frozen. While I was cleaning, I casually asked him, and he hurriedly hid his phone. I found it suspicious, but I had long lost any interest in him. Is he having an affair? No. Who would bother with a man like him who doesn't listen? Oh, nothing. He said that and put the phone down. I continued vacuuming, glancing at him sideways. Then he spoke to me. "By the way, you said we didn't have money the other day, but knowing you must have saved up quite a bit, right? How much do you have now?" I involuntarily looked at his face. He spoke in such a fawning manner. I was disgusted. "There's none. You're always withdrawing it, so you should know." "Not that. I mean like fixed deposits or other bank accounts." He tried to play it off, but I knew my persistent husband would keep asking until I answered. I was so fed up. I just blurted out, "I have about $400,000 in a bank account, but that money isn't for us to use freely. If that's gone, we're really finished." I've warned him as such, but I knew warning my husband was pointless. Oh, really? I see, he said, looking satisfied. As much as it pains me to admit, this is my husband. I suspected he would soon start badgering me for that money. But my prediction was wrong. The next day, he disappeared with the bank account details and our seal. All he left was a divorce application. Such a heartless man. I wasted my life by spinning it with him. It wasn't an overstatement. Yet, he treated me so cruelly, running off with all our savings. He must have thought I didn't matter at all. He probably was having an affair. Thinking this, I vowed to take thorough revenge and stamped the divorce papers. Then I quickly took action. After all, he was the one who left the divorce papers. His intention with leaving that divorce application was clear. After submitting the divorce papers to City Hall and becoming officially single, I felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off my shoulders. I was about to inform my children and took out my mobile phone. That's when I noticed several missed calls. It was my husband. Well, now my ex-husband. I could imagine him calling in desperation, but I had no obligation to talk to him. Going back home would surely lead to an unwanted encounter. So, I immediately contacted my daughter Eileen. Hello, Eileen? Mom, what's wrong? I explained everything to her. How her father ran off with all the savings in our bank account, how I submitted the divorce papers, and how he was repeatedly calling me. Without questioning our divorce, Eileen quickly suggested, Mom, come over to my place for now. It's better not to meet Dad. Grateful for her words, I headed to her house. But within 10 minutes of my arrival, the intercom at Eileen's rang. What should we do? It must be Dad. It's okay. Leave it to me. Eileen hid me in the bedroom and went to the door alone. Dad, what's wrong? I could hear her voice from the entrance. As expected, the visitor was my ex-husband. Is Sydney here? I can't get a hold of her. Oh, and I wanted to ask how to use that bank account. Calm down. What happened? That's the thing. I can't withdraw money from the bank. I need to talk to Sydney urgently. He said that to my daughter. He seemed quite panicked. It was about that, after all. Hearing my husband's frantic voice, I quietly listened to the conversation, a smile playing at the corners of my lips. Can't withdraw money? Why? Eileen asked, sounding surprised. Then he began to explain, albeit interruptedly. It seems there's a theft report on the bank account. I said it's okay because I'm her husband, but they won't let me access it. It's in Sydney's name, so I need to contact her. I almost laughed at the desperation in his voice. Yes, after realizing the bank account was taken, I immediately reported it as stolen to the bank, making it inaccessible. Even as a spouse, without my permission, he couldn't use the account. And now, he wasn't even a spouse anymore. That money was no longer his right to use. He talked with my daughter for a while, but apparently left after receiving a phone call. I came out of the bedroom and thanked Eileen, who then said, I figured out why Dad ran off with the bank account. I was taken aback by her words. Was there a conversation I hadn't heard? But it all made sense with that last phone call she received. The call had a shouting voice saying, When will you pay it back? It must mean Dad is in debt. Debt? I couldn't believe my ears. For what reason? When and from whom did he borrow money? He did all this without consulting me, and from the sounds of it, it wasn't from a reputable source. I knew he was foolish, but this was beyond my expectations. We should warn Eddie. Dad might go there next, looking for you, my daughter suggested. Okay. Then I contacted my son. I told him not to engage with his father if he came, and reassured him that I was safe. He laughed and said, "Got it. That old man is finally getting what he deserves." It seemed the children had realized how selfish their father was. No wonder my daughter didn't question the divorce. "Don't worry, Mom. My sister and I are on your side," my son assured me. Once again, I felt a deep sense of relief and truly believed that getting divorced was the right decision. Even as my cell phone continued to ring with calls from my ex-husband, I turned it off. I stayed at my daughter's house that night, surrounded by her husband and my grandchildren, enjoying a pleasant evening. The next day, as soon as I turned on my cell phone, there was another incoming call. Thinking it was him again, I was about to dismiss it, but then I saw it was an unknown number. Relieved it wasn't my husband, I answered the call, and it turned out to be from the branch of the bank where I had opened that bank account. Is there a problem? Well, about the bank account theft report you made the other day, since yesterday, a suspicious man has been trying to access Miss Logan's account. We confirmed the address, and we believe it's your husband. He insists on not leaving until the account is closed or released. The bank employee sounded troubled. I was astounded and apologized. Then I made a correction. We share the same current address, but we're divorced. I'm single, and I don't have a husband. I'll visit soon to update my name and address, but please don't comply with that man's request to close the account. The employee responded, "Understood. We'll safeguard your deposit. Rest assured." I forced myself to get up. I couldn't keep running away forever. It was time to confront my ex-husband. Accompanied by my daughter, I went to the bank. My ex-husband, ranting in a separate room, was brought out when we arrived. Seeing us, he stood up and shouted, "Hey, where were you yesterday? You didn't even answer the phone. Hurry up and cancel the bank account or make the payment." His arrogance was appalling, shouting at me like that. The bank staff, shocked, tried to calm him down. How could he not be embarrassed, causing such a scene? My daughter apologized to the staff and said we would take him home, asking for a moment. Hearing this, I spoke up. "No. What right do you have to say such things?" "What? I'm your husband. Aren't you supposed to listen to me?" I glared at my husband, who was still making such absurd statements. "You're the one who left the divorce papers, remember? I submitted them right away. We're strangers now. You have no right to take money from my bank account." My words made my husband turn red with anger. "What? Doing things on your own? Huh? Who's being selfish here? I hear you're in debt. I wasn't even aware of that. What have you been doing all this time? How did you know that?" At that moment, my husband turned pale. Then his cell phone rang again. Probably another call demanding repayment of the debt, but he didn't even try to answer it. I sighed at my pitiful husband. The phone is ringing. Aren't you going to answer it? Then, in a burst of anger, he retorted, I'm about to answer it now. As he switched the phone to speaker, a voice came through. Mr. Logan, when will you return the money? Can you wait a bit longer? I'm at the bank right now. He muttered in a low voice, but the other end was unforgiving. Is that so? Please hurry, or the interest will increase. Okay? Thank you. And then the call ended. We all fell silent. My husband couldn't even raise his head. My daughter and I sighed. Anyway, staying here will only trouble the bank staff. Let's go back home for now. Then withdraw the money. I'll go home if you do. My husband grumbled, but ultimately, he couldn't withdraw any money and slumped in defeat. Come on, let's go home. Finally, after being prompted by my daughter, he slowly got up and reluctantly followed us. How could you get into debt like this? Who did you borrow from? My daughter scolded him in the car. He began to speak in a small voice. After he turned 40, he hated going home to caregiving discussions. To kill time after work, he started going to lottery ticket places and got addicted, continuing even after retirement without my knowledge. He didn't want to hear me nag him about money, and he knew if I found out it was because of gambling, I'd be even more critical. He wanted to do what he'd like without criticism, especially after retirement. Though he had some winnings, he eventually began borrowing money to gamble. He was checking his cell phone frequently because of the constant calls about repayment. I thought he might be having an affair, but this was even worse. I can't believe it. My own father. How shameful. My daughter expressed her genuine disdain for her father's actions. I felt the same. How much do you owe? One. You mean $10,000? My daughter asked. Then my husband raised his voice in a fit of rage. It's $100,000. It's not just $10,000. What are you being so defiant about, you old fool? What are you going to do now? Don't ask me for help. My daughter was finally furious. Understandable. A debt of $100,000? It's unforgivable that he created such a debt as a family man. And worse, he inquired about my savings, thinking that after divorcing and paying off his debts, he could use the remaining $300,000 freely without my interference. I was foolish. I'm sorry, my husband said, bowing his head. But there's no cure for such an idiot. It's too late for apologies. We're strangers now. I don't know you. I said just that. After arriving home, I packed my things. My husband followed me around like a lost puppy. I'm really sorry. Please don't go. Don't abandon me. He begged, clinging to me. But he was the one who initially tried to abandon me. If you had managed to run off with my $400,000 as planned, what did you think would happen to me? With that, my husband was at a loss for words. It was the proof that he had never thought about me at all. I had no intention whatsoever of helping my husband. Goodbye. Selling this house should cover the debt repayment, I suppose. Good luck. My husband continued to desperately apologize, trying to stop me from leaving. But his words didn't resonate with me. I was a bit scared by my own lack of emotion towards him. But after all, my words had never touched him either. It was the same for both of us. I returned to my daughter's house again, in her car. Finally freed from my pathetic husband, I started a new life. Later, under the guise of discussing the division of assets post-divorce, a lawyer hired by my ex-husband came to see me. Such a foolish man. He could have just sold the house quietly instead of wasting money on a lawyer. The lawyer conveyed my ex-husband's claim that the $400,000 should be split in half, and so should the debt. But things wouldn't go as he imagined. The debt was incurred by him alone, without my knowledge. I have no obligation to accept it. Even the lawyer seemed exasperated. I did try to explain that to him. I guess my ex-husband never listened properly to anyone. As for the $400,000, it's money I saved and invested before we were married. It was not communal property, but my own. The bank transaction history is proof. I informed the lawyer of this. Then he asked me, "Isn't there any shared property?" There might be about $5,000 in savings, but the main shared asset would be the house. We built it after we got married, and it was a large house because we lived with his parents. The mortgage was quite a burden. So, the house will be split, he concluded with a wry smile. I gave the lawyer a big smile. Thank you for handling this. Eventually, the house was sold, and I received half of the proceeds as part of the property division. I told him to sell the house and pay off his debts. I didn't want the children to be burdened if he passed away with the debts remaining. Honestly, I hadn't planned to take any money from the house sale, but it was his greed that led to this. He shouldn't have proposed the property division. I just followed his wishes and went through the proper legal procedures. Both my daughter and son laughed heartily when they heard about it. The $100,000 debt included exorbitant interest. So I had the lawyer intervene, and it seems my ex-husband somehow managed to pay off the debt. I don't know what's become of him now, having lost his house, savings, and family. But if he has no remaining debts, it doesn't matter to me. Nothing good comes from being involved with such a person. My son also decided to cut ties with his father. A sensible decision, I believe. He's now renting an apartment and working day-to-day jobs. He should work hard, as it is the consequence of his actions. Meanwhile, my daughter offered me to live with her. Spending my days with my grandchildren and daughter is a joy. Her husband is kind and shows interest in the investments I used to manage, making for great conversations. This environment feels like heaven compared to my past life, where complaints were common. Marrying my husband, the only good thing was being blessed with my son and daughter. Knowing they are happy now makes me feel that all my efforts were worth it. Now it's my turn. No matter the age, life can be changed. I want to be happy for the rest of my life, making up for the time lost.